Security, escort her out. She's not part of our world. The words didn't echo, they sliced, clean and deliberate, across the marble entrance of the Grand Regent Ballroom as flashes from cameras popped like distant lightning and conversation slowed just enough to watch the moment unfold. Ava Reynolds didn't move. She stood at the edge of the red carpet in a simple black dress, no logos, no diamonds, no visible proof of status, just presence, steady and unshaken, as if the room itself had to adjust around her. A few guests exchanged looks. A quiet laugh slipped from somewhere near the velvet rope. She's not on the list, the attendant added, louder now, scrolling on a tablet that glowed cold blue against his face. Ava's eyes followed the motion, calm, observant, the way someone watches a game they've already solved. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Ava Reynolds. The gala pulsed with wealth, tailored suits, champagne flutes, curated smiles, but the air near the entrance tightened, charged, as if something invisible had just tilted. "I'm going to need you to step aside," the attendant said, softening his tone without softening the message. Behind him, a manager in a navy blazer approached, her posture polished, her eyes already making a decision. She looked Ava up and down, a quick scan, practiced and precise. "We have a very specific guest list tonight," she said, voice smooth as glass. "If you're here for general admission, that's on the lower level." A few feet away, an influencer lifted her phone, subtle at first, then steadier as the moment stretched. Someone whispered, "This is awkward." Someone else murmured, "Not really." Ava shifted her weight, just enough to break the stillness, but her face didn't change. No protest. No explanation. Just a quiet patience that didn't match the situation, and that mismatch made people look again. The attendant refreshed the list. "What name?" he asked. "Reynolds," she said. One word. "Even." He typed it in, frowned, then tilted the screen slightly toward the manager. The manager's lips pressed into a thin line. "There's no Reynolds authorized for this level," she replied, then, almost as an afterthought, added, "Let's not make this a scene." The word scene hung there, ironic and heavy, because the scene had already begun. A camera angle widened. A guest paused mid-sip. The rope remained closed. Ava's gaze lifted past them, beyond the lights, to the stage inside where a gold-embossed backdrop read in bold serif letters, Regent Foundation Annual Gala, presented by Meridian Holdings. For a fraction of a second, something in her eyes shifted, not anger, not surprise, recognition. Then it was gone. The manager said, "Firmer now, we're asking you to leave the entrance area." Ava finally reached into her clutch, not hurried, not hesitant, and pulled out her phone. The screen lit her face with a soft glow. The influencer's stream ticked upward, viewers climbing, comments flickering. Ava tapped once, then held the phone at her side, her voice low but clear enough to carry through the space that had gone just a little too quiet. "Interesting," she said, almost to herself, "considering I approved the final budget for this event at 2:15 this afternoon." The manager blinked. The attendant froze mid-scroll. A beat passed. Then another. And somewhere, deeper inside the ballroom, a phone began to ring. The ring did not belong to Ava. It came from inside the ballroom, sharp and out of place, cutting through the orchestra's soft string arrangement like a crack in polished glass, and for a moment no one moved because the timing felt wrong, too precise, as if the room itself had been waiting for it. The manager glanced toward the sound, then back at Ava, her confidence slipping just a fraction. "Who exactly are you calling?" she asked, her tone still controlled but no longer effortless. Ava did not answer right away. She simply watched the shift ripple outward as a few more phones lifted, as whispers turned into quiet speculation, as the influencer's live stream numbers ticked higher with every second of silence. The attendant cleared his throat and tried again, tapping faster on the tablet. Like urgency could rewrite reality. "There is no record here," he insisted, louder now, almost performing for the small crowd that had gathered. Ava tilted her head slightly, studying him the way one studies a detail that does not quite belong. "Then your system is incomplete," she said, her voice even, almost gentle, which somehow made it land harder. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped closer from the side, curiosity written across his face. "I have been to this gala 3 years in a row," he said quietly to no one in particular, "and I have never seen them question someone like this unless—" He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air, unfinished and understood. The manager caught it too. Her posture straightened, her smile tightening at the edges. "We are simply maintaining standards," she replied, though now it sounded more like a defense than a policy. Ava's phone vibrated once in her hand. She glanced at the screen, then back up, her expression unchanged, but something had shifted behind her eyes, something deliberate. "You said I am not part of your world," she said, addressing the manager directly now, each word measured, "so let us test that assumption." Another vibration. This time, louder, the sound echoing faintly from the ballroom doors as well, as if multiple lines had just connected at once. The influencer leaned closer, whispering to her audience, "Something is happening, I can feel it." A guest near the rope murmured, "This is going to be bad." The manager took a step forward, lowering her voice. "Whatever you think this is, you are creating unnecessary attention." Ava met her gaze fully for the first time, calm and unblinking. "No," she said, "attention was already here. You just decided where to point it." The word settled into the space between them, heavy and undeniable. Inside the ballroom, the music faltered for a second, just enough for people to notice. A stagehand crossed quickly behind the curtains. A man near the podium checked his earpiece, confusion flickering across his face. Outside, at the entrance, the attendant's tablet suddenly refreshed on its own, the screen flickering as new data populated faster. Then he could scroll. His fingers froze. "Wait," he whispered, barely audible, eyes widening as he read something that had not been there seconds ago. The manager turned sharply. "What is it?" she demanded. He did not answer right away. He just looked from the screen to Ava, then back again, as if trying to reconcile two completely different versions of reality. Ava slipped her phone back into her clutch, the motion slow, controlled, final. "Go ahead," she said softly, "check again." And this time, when he did, the name Reynolds was not just on the list. It was at the very top. The air did not just change. It shifted direction, like a current reversing in the middle of a calm sea, and suddenly every eye that had dismissed Ava moments ago snapped back toward her with a new kind of attention, sharper, heavier, uncertain. The attendant's hand hovered over the tablet, fingers trembling just enough to betray him. This has to be a glitch," he muttered, but his voice no longer carried authority, only confusion. The manager stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step louder than it should have been. "Let me see that," she said, reaching for the device, her composure now stretched thin. She scanned the screen quickly, then again more slowly, her eyes narrowing as if the letters might rearrange themselves under pressure. They did not. At the top of the guest registry, bold and unmistakable, was the name Ava Reynolds, followed by a designation that had not been visible before, one that carried weight far beyond a simple invitation. Founder level. Full access. Executive override. The manager's lips parted, but no words came out. Around them, the quiet had grown dense, layered with whispers that no longer tried to hide. "Did you see that?" someone said. "She is on the list." Another voice followed, lower, almost impressed. "Not just on it. She is at the top." The influencer leaned in closer, her phone steady, capturing every second as the narrative turned in real time. "This just flipped," she whispered to her viewers, her tone shifting from curiosity to disbelief. Ava did not react to the murmurs. She did not step forward or raise her voice. She simply stood there, composed, as if this outcome had always been inevitable. The manager finally found her words, but they came out softer, stripped of their earlier certainty. "Ms. Reynolds, there must have been a delay in the system," she said, forcing a smile that no longer held. We were not aware of your status. Ava looked at her, not with anger, but with a calm clarity that felt far more precise. You were not interested in being aware, she replied, her tone even, her words landing with quiet finality. The statement did not echo, but it lingered, settling into the space like something undeniable. The attendant stepped back, lowering the tablet slightly, as if distance could separate him from what he had just seen. Should I open the line? He asked hesitantly, glancing between Ava and the manager. The question itself revealed everything. Permission had shifted. Authority had moved. The manager hesitated, just for a second, but in that second the entire balance of the room tilted. Inside the ballroom, the stage lights flickered briefly, and a coordinator rushed past the entrance doors, speaking urgently into a headset. Something was happening beyond the velvet rope, something connected, something bigger than a simple guest list correction. Ava noticed it, of course she did. Her eyes flicked toward the doors for a fraction of a second, then returned to the people in front of her. Go ahead, she said calmly, not to the manager, not to the attendant, but to the moment itself. The attendant swallowed, then unhooked the velvet rope with careful hands, the gesture no longer routine but deliberate, almost cautious. The path opened. No announcement. No apology. Just space where there had been a barrier seconds before. The manager stepped aside, her posture adjusting, her expression recalibrating into something more respectful, but the shift came too late to erase what had already been revealed. Ava took one step forward, then another, her heels soft against the floor, each movement controlled, unhurried, undeniable. As she crossed into the ballroom, the whispers followed her, no longer dismissive, but searching, trying to catch up to a truth they had missed. And somewhere near the stage, a man in a tailored tuxedo turned sharply, his expression tightening as he recognized the name that had just reappeared at the top of every screen. The ballroom did not welcome her with applause. It reacted with hesitation, the kind that spreads quietly from one table to the next when something unexpected enters a space designed for predictability. Conversations lowered instead of stopping, but the rhythm was off now, uneven, like music played half a beat behind. Ava Reynolds walked forward without adjusting her pace, her presence cutting through the polished room more sharply than any announcement could. Crystal chandeliers reflected across the marble floor, catching on her silhouette, but she did not look up at them. She looked ahead, toward the stage, toward the center of control. A server paused mid-step, tray balanced in one hand, eyes following her. A couple near the bar leaned closer together, whispering behind practice smiles. Who is she? One asked. I thought I knew everyone on this list, the other replied, but there was doubt in the answer now. Near the stage, the man in the tailored tuxedo had already stepped down from his position, his attention locked onto Ava as she approached. His name was Daniel Whitmore, event director, known for precision, for exclusivity, for controlling every detail down to the lighting cues and guest placement. And right now, control was slipping through his fingers in real time. He adjusted his cufflinks as if the motion could restore order. Ms. Reynolds, he said as she came within 10 feet, his voice measured but tight beneath the surface, there seems to have been some confusion at the entrance. Ava stopped just short of him, leaving enough space to make the distance intentional. There was no confusion, she replied calmly. There was a decision. The words landed without force, but they carried weight, the kind that does not need volume to be heard. Daniel glanced briefly toward the entrance, where the manager now stood still, watching, her earlier authority reduced to silence. Then he looked back at Ava, recalculating. Regardless, he continued, forcing a thin smile, we are glad you are here now. If you would like, we can have someone escort you to a table. Ava's gaze shifted past him to the stage behind, where a large screen displayed the evening sponsors in slow rotation. Meridian Holdings appeared in gold lettering, followed by a list of executive contributors. Her eyes paused there for half a second, just long enough to register, just long enough for Daniel to notice. I will walk myself, she said. The simplicity of the sentence removed any remaining illusion of hierarchy. Around them, attention had fully shifted. Phones were no longer hidden. The influencer from the entrance had moved closer, capturing everything, her voice low but excited as she narrated to an audience growing by the second. "She just walked in like she owns the place," she whispered, unaware of how accurate that sounded. Ava took another step forward, passing Daniel without waiting for permission, and the movement forced him to turn, to follow, to adjust his position in a room he had designed but no longer fully controlled. A woman seated near the front table straightened in her chair, recognition dawning slowly. "Reynolds," she murmured, almost to herself, "that name sounds familiar." Another guest across from her nodded, pulling out his phone, searching quickly, his expression shifting as results appeared. "It is not just familiar," he said under his breath. "It is everywhere." Near the stage, a coordinator leaned into Daniel's side, whispering urgently, but Ava heard enough to understand the tone if not every word. "The board is on standby," the coordinator said. "They are asking for confirmation." Daniel's jaw tightened. Confirmation of what, he did not say, but the question hung between them, heavy with implication. Ava reached the edge of the stage and paused, not stepping up yet, not claiming it fully, but close enough to make the intention clear. She turned slightly, her voice low but precise. "You might want to answer that," she said, nodding toward the earpiece Daniel was now adjusting with unsteady fingers. For the first time since she entered, Daniel did not have an immediate response. He touched the earpiece, listening, his expression shifting from controlled confidence to something closer to realization. Around them, the room held its breath, waiting, not for permission anymore, but for the moment when everything that had been assumed would finally be proven wrong. Daniel did not respond right away. His hand stayed pressed against the earpiece, his posture stiffening as the voice on the other end continued speaking, faster now, sharper, no longer asking but instructing. The color in his face shifted, not dramatically, but enough for those closest to notice. "Understood," he said finally, his voice lower than before, controlled but strained, as if each word had to pass through a tightening filter. He pulled his hand away slowly, then looked at Ava again, this time not as an interruption, not as a problem to be managed, but as a variable he had failed to calculate. Around them, the room leaned in without moving, a collective stillness built on curiosity and something else now, something closer to anticipation. Ava remained exactly where she was, one step from the stage, her posture unchanged, her expression steady, as if she had been here before, in different rooms, under different lights, facing the same miscalculation dressed in new language. A memory brushed past her, not loud, not overwhelming, just present. A smaller ballroom, years earlier. A younger version of herself standing near the back, holding an invitation that had been questioned twice before she even reached the door. "You should wait here," someone had told her then, polite but firm, as others walked past without pause. She had waited. 10 minutes. 20. Long enough to understand that waiting was not about verification. It was about placement. She blinked once, and the memory dissolved, replaced by the present, by the polished floor beneath her heels, by the quiet tension stretching across the room. "Ms. Reynolds," Daniel said again, but the name sounded different now, heavier, more careful. "We have just received confirmation from Meridian." He paused, choosing his next words with precision. "It appears there has been a misalignment in how your role was communicated to our front team." Ava tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in acknowledgement of the phrasing. "Misalignment," she repeated, softly, as if testing the weight of the word. That is one way to describe it. A few guests exchanged looks. The phrase did not convince them. It did not need to. The truth had already settled into the room. The influencer shifted closer, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke into her phone. "They are backtracking now. You can see it happening live." A man near the front table stood up slightly, adjusting his jacket as he looked between Ava and the stage, his expression sharpening as recognition clicked into place. "Reynolds, that is Ava Reynolds," he said quietly, but not quietly enough. The name traveled faster than any announcement. One table to the next. One whisper becoming another. Phones lifted again, not to record confusion, but to confirm identity. Search results. Headlines. Images. A woman in a tailored suit on a business magazine cover. A keynote speech in a packed auditorium. The same eyes. The same composure. Back at the stage, Daniel took a small step back, not retreating, but making space. "The board has requested that you join us on stage," he said, his tone now formal, deferential, each syllable measured. Immediately. The word landed differently than his earlier instructions. It was no longer a command. It was a correction. Ava looked at him for a moment, long enough for the silence to register, long enough for everyone watching to feel the shift complete itself. Then she glanced past him, toward the large screen where Meridian Holdings continued to rotate among the sponsors, its gold lettering steady, unchanged, as if the system itself had always known what the room had just learned. "They did not request it," she said calmly. "They expected it." Daniel did not argue. He could not. The difference between request and expectation had just become clear to everyone present. Ava placed one hand lightly at her side, grounding herself in the moment, not for strength, but for control, the kind that does not come from raising a voice, but from understanding exactly when to use it. The room held its breath again, but this time it was not out of doubt. It was out of recognition. Something had shifted beyond recovery. And Ava Reynolds had not raised her voice once. The silence did not break when Ava moved. It deepened, stretching across the ballroom like a held breath that no one wanted to release too early. She stepped onto the stage without hesitation, her heels barely making a sound against the polished surface, yet every movement carried weight, the kind that does not ask for attention but commands it anyway. The lights adjusted automatically, sensors reacting to presence, casting a soft glow across her face as if the room itself had finally aligned with reality. Behind her, Daniel Whitmore remained just off to the side, no longer leading, no longer directing, his role reduced to observation in a space he once controlled. A technician near the control booth hesitated, then glanced at the stage manager, waiting for instruction, but none came. Because the instruction had already been given, just not by him. Ava reached the center of the stage and paused, not to gather herself, but to let the moment settle, to allow the room to fully register what had just shifted. The large screen behind her flickered once, then stabilized, still displaying Meridian Holdings in gold lettering, but now the name carried a different weight, a different context. A microphone stood at the podium, untouched, waiting, but Ava did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she turned slightly, her gaze sweeping across the room, table by table, face by face, not searching, not judging, simply seeing. And in that quiet observation, people felt something they had not expected to feel tonight. Accountability. A man near the front straightened in his chair. A woman lowered her phone slowly, her expression no longer curious but reflective. The influencer, still recording, whispered, "She has not said a word," and the whole room changed. Ava finally stepped toward the podium, her fingers brushing the edge of it, grounding the moment in something physical, something real. When she spoke, her voice did not need amplification, but the microphone carried it anyway, smooth and clear across the ballroom. 17 minutes ago, she said, her tone calm, measured. "I was told I did not belong here." The sentence did not accuse. It stated. It placed a timestamp on something everyone had just witnessed. A ripple moved through the audience, subtle but undeniable. Ava continued, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged. "Not because of a missing name," she added, "but because of an assumption." The word landed heavier than any raised voice could have. Near the entrance, the manager lowered her gaze, the earlier confidence replaced with something quieter, something harder to hold onto. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, his hands clasped in front of him now, listening not as a host, but as someone being addressed. Ava let a brief silence follow, not to create drama, but to let truth settle where it needed to. "This event," she said, gesturing lightly behind her toward the screen, "exists because of vision, investment, and trust." She paused again, just long enough. "And I happen to be responsible for all three." There was no emphasis in her voice, no need for it. The statement carried its own gravity. A few guests exchanged glances, not in disbelief anymore, but in understanding, the kind that arrives late but stays. The man who had recognized her earlier nodded slowly, almost to himself, as if confirming what he already knew. Ava rested her hand lightly on the podium again, her expression steady, her presence filling the space without effort. So tonight, she continued, is not about correcting a list. Her eyes moved across the room once more, meeting the gaze of those who had watched, those who had questioned, those who had remained silent. It is about correcting a standard. The words did not echo. They settled. And in that moment, the gala was no longer just an event. It had become a turning point. The room did not applaud. Not yet. It processed. The kind of silence that follows truth when it lands too clean to argue with, too direct to ignore. Ava Reynolds stood at the podium, her hand resting lightly against its edge, not gripping, not claiming, just steady, as if she had no need to prove ownership of something that was already hers. Across the ballroom, the shift was visible in small details. A guest who had laughed earlier now avoided eye contact. A woman near the center table slowly set down her champagne glass, her expression tightening with realization. Even the servers moved differently, quieter, more deliberate, as if the air itself demanded respect now. Ava's gaze moved again, not scanning, but acknowledging, recognizing the room for what it had been and what it was becoming. Standards, she repeated softly, the word now carrying more weight than before. They are not defined by appearance. She paused, allowing the sentence to settle, to reach the corners of the room where doubt still lingered. They are revealed by behavior. The distinction was precise. It did not accuse one person. It exposed a pattern. Near the entrance, the manager's shoulders dropped slightly, the realization no longer something she could redirect or manage. The attendant stood beside her, tablet lowered, no longer scrolling, no longer searching for validation from a system that had already spoken. Daniel Whitmore remained still at the edge of the stage, his posture controlled but no longer authoritative, his presence reduced to witness. Ava continued, her tone unchanged, calm but unyielding. Every room like this claims to represent excellence, she said. But excellence is not who gets past the door. A subtle shift moved through the audience again, a tightening, a recognition. It is how you treat the person standing at it. The line did not rise. It did not need to. It landed with the quiet force of something undeniable. A man at the back nodded once, slowly, as if the truth had reached him later than others, but just as clearly. The influencer lowered her phone slightly, no longer narrating, just watching now, her earlier excitement replaced with something closer to respect. Ava took a small step forward, not leaving the podium, but closing the distance between herself and the audience by a fraction that felt intentional. 17 minutes, she said again, her voice steady. That is all it took. The repetition drew attention back to the timeline, to the immediacy of what had happened. Not to discover who I was, she clarified. But to reveal how you respond when you think someone does not matter. The distinction was sharp. It reframed the entire moment. Around the room, posture shifted. Eyes lowered. Some guests looked toward the entrance, as if replaying what they had seen, now through a different lens. Ava did not rush. She did not fill the silence. She let it do its work. Then, with the same calm precision, she added, power does not arrive when it is announced. A slight pause. It is already there. You just decide whether you recognize it. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the statement landing closer to him than most. Ava's gaze met his briefly, not with confrontation, but with clarity. Then she looked back to the room. Tonight was never about access, she said. It was about assumption. The word settled again, heavier now, reinforced by everything that had unfolded. A few guests began to nod, not out of agreement alone, but out of acknowledgement, the kind that comes when denial is no longer an option. Ava's hand lifted slightly from the podium, not gesturing widely, just enough to mark the shift into something final. And assumptions, she said, her voice steady, have consequences. The sentence did not close the moment. It opened something else. Something larger. Because for the first time since she stepped onto the stage, the room understood that what came next was not just reflection. It was action. The room did not move forward after her last sentence. It paused, suspended between what had just been exposed and what was about to unfold. Ava Reynolds stood at the center of that stillness, her presence no longer questioned, no longer measured against appearances, but anchored in something far more difficult to dismiss. The silence stretched, not empty, but full, carrying the weight of realization across every table, every glance, every quiet breath that had shifted since she entered. Then, slowly, she stepped back from the podium, just one step, creating space not for retreat, but for transition. Her eyes lowered briefly, not in hesitation, but in reflection, and for a moment, the ballroom faded around her. A different room surfaced. Smaller. Dimmer. Years ago. A younger version of herself standing near the edge of a reception, her heels slightly worn, her dress simple, her name checked twice before being acknowledged once. "We just need to confirm," someone had said, their tone polite but distant, while others moved past her without pause, without question. She remembered the way the air had felt then, thick with quiet judgment, the kind that never needed to be spoken aloud because it was already understood. She remembered standing there, not arguing, not raising her voice, just waiting, watching, learning. Learning that rooms like these were never really about invitation. They were about perception. And perception could be wrong. The memory did not linger. It did not need to. It had already done its work long before tonight. Ava lifted her gaze again, returning fully to the present, to the bright lights, to the polished room that now stood still under her control. When she spoke again, her voice carried something deeper, not louder, but grounded in time. "This is not the first room that made that mistake," she said calmly. The sentence moved through the audience differently, more personal, more rooted. "And it will not be the last," she added, not as a warning, but as a reality. A few guests shifted in their seats, the statement reaching beyond the moment, beyond the gala, into something broader, something familiar. Ava's posture remained steady, her hands relaxed at her sides, her presence unchanged. "But what happens next," she continued, "that is always a choice." The distinction was clear. The past explained the pattern. The present defined the response. Near the entrance, the manager finally lifted her gaze again, her expression no longer defensive, but uncertain, as if she was beginning to understand the weight of that choice. Daniel Whitmore stood motionless, his earlier control fully replaced by quiet attention, his role now reduced to listening, to absorbing what could not be undone. Ava took another small step forward, closing the distance she had created, returning to the podium not as a speaker, but as the center of the room's new direction. "You cannot control every assumption," she said, her tone even. "But you can control what you do when it is exposed." The line settled deeply, drawing a subtle shift from the audience, a recognition that the moment was no longer about what had happened, but about what would follow. The influencer, still recording, did not speak this time. She simply watched, her earlier commentary replaced by quiet focus, understanding that the moment no longer needed narration. Ava's gaze moved once more across the room, slower now, deliberate, acknowledging not just the people, but the shift within them. "Tonight," she said, her voice steady, "you were given a mirror." The word lingered, reflective, unavoidable. "And now," she added, a slight pause marking the transition, "you decide what to do with what you saw." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer uncertain. It was ready. Because the room understood that the next move would not come from her words. It would come from her actions. The silence did not break because of her words. It broke because of what came after them. Ava Reynolds did not raise her voice. She did not signal for applause. She did not wait for approval. She simply reached into her clutch again, pulled out her phone, and tapped once, deliberate, precise, as if the next move had already been scheduled long before she stepped onto that stage. Across the ballroom, subtle shifts began to ripple through the staff before anyone announced anything. A coordinator near the control booth suddenly straightened, eye scanning a tablet that had just refreshed with new instructions. Another staff member froze mid-step, then quickly changed direction, moving toward the stage with purpose instead of routine. The system had been activated, and for those who understood how these events were truly run, the difference was unmistakable. Ava looked up, her gaze steady, her voice calm as she spoke again, this time not to the room, but through it. "Corporate channel is now live," she said, not loudly, but clearly enough that it carried across the silence. Daniel Whitmore's head turned sharply, his hand instinctively moving back to his earpiece, but this time he did not speak first. He listened. And whatever he heard on the other end changed everything. "Confirmed," he said under his breath, barely audible, but enough for the stage manager beside him to stiffen. Ava continued, her tone unchanged, as if she were simply stating the next step in a process no one else could see. "All event operations are now under executive review," she said. The words landed like a switch being flipped. Around the room, screens that had been displaying sponsor rotations flickered again, then paused. The Meridian Holdings logo remained, but new text began to populate beneath it, subtle at first, then unmistakable. "Internal oversight protocol initiated." A low murmur spread through the audience, not confusion anymore, but recognition that this was no longer just a speech. This was control being exercised in real time. The influencer's phone captured every second, her voice returning in a harsh tone. "She is not just speaking," she whispered. "She is running the room." Ava took one step away from the podium, not retreating, but repositioning, allowing the system she had activated to become visible. "When standards fail," she said calmly, "systems respond." The sentence was not dramatic. It was procedural. And that made it more powerful. Near the entrance, the manager's phone buzzed sharply in her hand. She looked down, her expression tightening as she read, her posture shifting again, this time not from doubt, but from realization. The message was clear. Access suspended pending review. The same authority she had used minutes ago had now been removed without discussion. The attendant beside her received a similar notification, his grip loosening on the tablet as if the device itself no longer belonged to him. Back on stage, Daniel lowered his hand from his earpiece slowly, his earlier control replaced by something quieter, something more careful. "The board has authorized full operational oversight," he said, his voice now carrying across the room, not as an announcement, but as confirmation. Ava did not look at him. She did not need to. "Effective immediately," she added, finishing the sentence he could not. The room absorbed it all at once. Not just the words, but the structure behind them. This was not reaction. This was preparation. Ava Reynolds had not walked into the room to defend herself. She had walked in with authority already in place, waiting for the moment it needed to be used. She turned her gaze back to the audience, her expression steady, her presence unchanged. "This is what accountability looks like," she said. And for the first time that night, no one questioned where she belonged. The shift was no longer subtle. It was visible, measurable, undeniable in the way the room reorganized itself without being told. Staff who had once moved with quiet confidence now paused, waiting for direction that no longer came from the same place. Conversations that once carried casual authority now dropped into careful tones, each word weighed before it was spoken. Ava Reynolds stood at the center of it all, not elevated by volume, but by alignment, as if everything that had just changed was simply returning to its correct position. She stepped forward again, not toward the podium this time, but past it, allowing the space behind her to transform. The screen flickered once more, and the Meridian Holdings logo shrank slightly, making room for a new line beneath it, one that had not been scheduled, one that had not been rehearsed. Executive oversight in effect. Ava did not look back at it. She did not need to. She knew exactly what it said. "There is a difference," she began, her voice steady, carrying through the room without strain, between hosting a room and understanding it. The statement settled across the audience, drawing attention not just to the event, but to the structure behind it. Daniel Whitmore shifted again, his earlier confidence replaced with a quiet awareness of being addressed, not personally, but precisely. Ava continued, her tone unchanged. "Tonight, This room was managed, she said. But it was not understood. A few guests lowered their gaze, the distinction cutting deeper than any direct accusation could. Near the entrance, the manager's phone buzzed again, a second notification, shorter this time, clearer. Role suspended pending executive review. She did not move. She did not argue. She simply stood there, holding a device that no longer carried authority. Ava's eyes moved briefly. In that direction, not to confront, but to acknowledge the shift. Then she returned her focus to the room. When perception replaces process, she said calmly, you stop building systems. You start building barriers. The words landed with precision, connecting everything that had just unfolded into something larger than a single moment. The influencer, still recording, no longer whispered commentary. Her silence said more. Because what was happening now did not need translation. Ava took another step forward, her presence closing the distance between herself and the audience, not physically, but psychologically. And barriers, she added, her voice steady, do not protect excellence. They hide failure. A quiet reaction moved through the room, not loud, not disruptive, but real. A man near the back exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had not realized he was holding. A woman at the front table nodded once, her expression no longer uncertain. Back near the stage, a technician received a final confirmation on his screen, then adjusted the system settings without hesitation. The event was no longer following its original program. It had been rewritten. Ava paused, allowing the shift to complete itself, allowing the room to fully understand what had just happened. Then she spoke again, her tone unchanged, but her words sharper now, more direct. You did not question my name, she said. You questioned my presence. The distinction landed immediately. No one moved. No one interrupted. Because the truth had already removed any space for denial. Ava's gaze moved across the audience one last time, steady, deliberate, grounded in control that did not need to be proven again. And now, she said, a slight pause marking the transition, you are watching what happens when presence is no longer ignored. The room did not respond with applause. It responded with understanding. Because in that moment, every person in that ballroom realized the same thing at the same time. This was no longer her proving who she was. This was her deciding what the room would become. The room did not return to normal. It recalibrated. Conversations did not resume the way they had before. They reorganized around a new center, one that was no longer dictated by invitations or titles printed on a program, but by the present standing at the front of the stage. Ava Reynolds did not rush the moment. She allowed it to settle, to take shape in the minds of everyone watching, because understanding, real understanding, needed space to land. A chair shifted near the front table. Then another. One guest slowly rose to his feet, not in protest, not in performance, but in acknowledgement. It was not applause yet. It was recognition. Others followed, not all at once, but gradually, like a wave building without instruction. Ava did not react to it. She did not nod or gesture for it to continue. She simply stood, steady, allowing the room to decide its own response. Because this was no longer about her commanding respect. It was about the room realizing it had already withheld it. Daniel Whitmore remained near the edge of the stage, his posture still, his gaze fixed forward, no longer attempting to regain control, only witnessing the full consequence of what had unfolded under his watch. Near the entrance, the manager finally stepped forward, just a few steps, hesitant but intentional, as if drawn by something she could not ignore anymore. She stopped halfway across the room, her earlier certainty gone, replaced by something quieter, something closer to accountability. Ava's eyes met hers briefly, not with judgment, but with clarity. Then she turned back to the audience. This moment, Ava said, her voice calm, grounded, carrying without effort, is not about embarrassment. The sentence redirected the energy immediately, shifting it away from spectacle and toward purpose. The guests who had stood remained standing, but their posture changed, less reactive, more attentive. It is about awareness, she continued. Because what happened tonight did not start at that door. Her words moved through the room, connecting the present to something deeper, something systemic. A man near the back nodded slowly, understanding forming in real time. A woman at the side table lowered her eyes, reflecting, not out of shame alone, but out of recognition. Ava took a small step forward again, her presence closing the distance between herself and the room one final time. "It started long before I arrived," she said. "In policies that were never questioned. In assumptions that were never challenged. In moments that were dismissed because they seemed small." The room absorbed it, piece by piece, each sentence building on the last, forming something that could not be undone by a simple apology. The influencer lowered her phone completely now, no longer recording, just listening, understanding that the story had moved beyond documentation into something more permanent. Ava's voice remained steady, unwavering. "And that is why correction cannot be temporary," she said. "It has to be structural." The word carried weight, finality, direction. Near the control booth, a staff member adjusted the system again, implementing the next phase of oversight without hesitation, as if the entire operation had accepted its new alignment. Ava paused, letting the word settle, letting the room feel the shift from moment to movement. Then, with the same calm precision that had guided every step of the night, she added, effective immediately, "This event will continue under new leadership." The statement was not loud. It did not need to be. Because everyone in that room already knew who that leadership belonged to. Ava Reynolds did not take control by announcing it. She revealed that it had always been hers. No one questioned the transition. It did not feel abrupt. It felt inevitable, as if the room had been moving toward this point long before anyone realized it. Ava Reynolds stepped fully into the role she had just named, not with a dramatic gesture, but with quiet precision, the kind that redefines a space without disrupting it. The lighting adjusted subtly, warmer now, less performative, more intentional. The music, which had faded into uncertainty moments earlier, returned at a lower volume, softer, controlled, no longer competing with the tension that had filled the room but supporting the shift that had replaced it. Ava rested her hands lightly at the podium once more, not as a speaker returning to a script, but as a leader setting a direction. "We will continue tonight," she said calmly, her voice steady, carrying across the room with clarity that did not need amplification. "But we will not continue the same way." The distinction settled immediately, drawing focus not just to the event, but to the standard she was establishing in real time. A few guests exchanged glances, not uncertain anymore, but attentive, ready. Ava's gaze moved across the front tables, meeting the eyes of those who had influence, those who had observed, those who now understood their role in what came next. "Every guest in this room is here because of contribution," she continued. "Not because of appearance. Not because of assumption." The repetition reinforced the shift, grounding it in something measurable, something real. Near the entrance, the manager took another step forward, slower this time, her posture no longer defensive, her expression open, as if she were listening in a way she had not before. Ava acknowledged her briefly with a glance, then returned her focus to the room. "And contribution," she added, "deserves consistency." The word carried structure, expectation, accountability. A man near the center table adjusted his posture, leaning forward slightly, engaged now, no longer observing from a distance. A woman beside him nodded once, her earlier uncertainty replaced with clarity. Ava took a small step away from the podium, allowing the space to breathe, allowing the room to feel the transition not as a break, but as a continuation under new alignment. "So here is what changes," she said, her tone still calm, but now directive. "All guest services protocols will be reviewed and standardized across every event moving forward." The statement moved beyond the room, beyond the night, into something larger, something lasting. A coordinator near the control booth nodded immediately, already noting the directive, already understanding the scope. "Every point of entry," Ava continued, "will reflect the same standard, without exception." The word exception landed clearly, removing any space for selective interpretation. The influencer, standing near the side now, lifted her phone again, but this time her expression was different. Not excitement. Not disbelief. Respect. Ava paused, letting the directive settle, letting the room absorb not just the correction, but the commitment behind it. And every member of this team, she added, her gaze briefly returning to the staff positioned along the walls, will be trained to recognize presence before they question it. The line carried weight, not as criticism, but as expectation. The staff stood straighter, not out of fear, but out of clarity, understanding the standard had shifted and would not shift back. Ava returned to the center of the stage, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, grounded. Because tonight, she said, her voice soft but precise, was not an exception. A slight pause. It was a reflection. The word settled across the room, final, undeniable. And in that moment, the gala was no longer just continuing. It was being redefined in real time, under leadership that did not need to prove itself again, because it had already been revealed. The room did not return to what it had been before. It could not. Something too clear had been revealed, something too precise to be undone by polite conversation or carefully restored music. Ava Reynolds stood at the center of it, not elevated by applause, not surrounded by spectacle, but grounded in a presence that no longer needed explanation. The event continued, just as she said it would, but every movement carried a different meaning now. Guests spoke with more intention. Staff moved with greater awareness. Even the smallest interactions reflected a shift that had reached deeper than the surface of the evening. Ava stepped away from the podium for the final time, her hands relaxed at her sides, her posture unchanged, her pace steady as she descended from the stage. No announcement followed her. No spotlight tracked her movement. And yet, every eye followed. Not out of curiosity anymore, but out of understanding. Daniel Whitmore remained where he was, watching as she passed, his earlier authority replaced with something quieter, something more reflective. He did not speak. He did not attempt to reclaim anything. Because there was nothing left to reclaim. Near the entrance, the manager stood still, no longer positioned as a gatekeeper, but as someone who had just witnessed the cost of a decision made too quickly. As Ava approached, their eyes met once more. This time, there was no tension. No resistance. Only recognition. Ava did not stop. She did not need to. The moment between them had already said everything that needed to be said. Across the room, conversations resumed, but they carried something different now, something more deliberate. A man at one table leaned toward his colleague and said quietly, "We missed it." The other nodded, not in disagreement, but in acceptance. "We did not look closely enough," he replied. The influencer, standing near the side of the room, lowered her phone completely. For the first time since the moment began, she chose not to record. Some things, she realized, were meant to be understood, not replayed. Ava reached the edge of the ballroom floor and paused briefly, not to look back, but to take in the space as it was now. Not as it had been when she arrived. Not as it had tried to define her. But as it had become after truth moved through it. The lighting, the music, the polished surfaces, they were all the same. But the meaning behind them had shifted. And that shift would not disappear when the night ended. Ava turned slightly, her gaze moving across the room one last time, not searching, not measuring, simply acknowledging. Then, with the same calm precision that had guided every step of the night, she spoke one final sentence, not into a microphone, not amplified, but clear enough to carry to those who needed to hear it. "Respect is not something you grant," she said quietly. "It is something you recognize." The words did not echo. They settled. And in that moment, no one in the room questioned where she belonged. Because she had never been out of place. They had simply failed to see it. And now, they would not forget.